Good morning. Today we're going to get into the 21st chapter of the Gospel according to Luke on our Advent journey through Luke. Most of this chapter is devoted to Jesus' teaching what is commonly known about called the eschaton, which means the end, what people think of as the end times. But right before he gets into that, right at the first of the chapter, there's this story. It says he looked up and saw rich people putting their gifts into the treasury. He also saw a poor widow put in two small copper coins. He said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them, for all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty has put in all she had to live on." Now that story, that 4-verse passage follows right on the heels of chapter 20, verse 46 through 47. Beware the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and love to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and to have the best seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses, and for the sake of appearance say long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation. Those two stories are related. I believe it's a very stark, overt statement by the author of Luke that Jesus and God side upon the side of the marginalized, the poor, the oppressed, the downtrodden. That's where God works. That's where God is. That's whose side God is on, not those who are rich and powerful on their own right. Which, if we think about that, and Jesus critiques the powers that be for devouring widows' houses, their policies existed in a way that prevented widows from being able to sustain themselves. That brings into question, well, what are our public policies and our social life, and how does that inhibit or prohibit people from being able to support themselves? That's the critique of our policy. It's not whether the biblical critique of our policy is not whether our policy is liberal or conservative, left or right. The biblical critique is, are we allowing the most people? Are we looking out for the common good, especially that of the poor? We will be judged by how we treat the least of society come the end, which the rest of the story is about. The rest of the chapter is about the end times, or at least it's commonly thought to be. And it's interesting because these passages are so used to throughout history. Within 100 years of this being written down, people were using these passages to say that the end was coming on a certain date. And every time anyone has tried to calendarize, to put a date on the end of time, it's been wrong. It's failed. It's never once succeeded, obviously, which gives little credence whenever you hear someone try to lay a date on the end of time. I think the interesting thing to note in this is near the end of the chapter, after these stories, Jesus says, "Be on guard so that your hearts are not weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness and the worries of this life, and that day does not catch you unexpectedly like a trap. For it will come upon all who live on the face of the whole earth. Be alert at all times, praying that you may have the strength to escape all these things that will take place, and to stand before the Son of Man." Be on guard so that your hearts are not weighed down. I think that is the key there. We are not to live in fear of the end, merely just to trust in God and not be weighed down by it. And to trust in God and not be weighed down about it, we should take God's side with God's people, which are the poor and the oppressed and the lowest of society. So it's artful the way Luke has arranged, or the author of Luke has arranged these stories about power right up next to these stories about supposedly the end of time, and created this path for us to follow, or this teaching for us to follow about whose side God is on and who God is going to be with in times of strife. We'll get into chapter 22 tomorrow with the Festival of the Unleavened Bread, and which leads into the Lord's Supper and things like that, and keeps us moving us closer to Jesus' death and crucifixion and then his resurrection. And we'll finish up with chapter 24 on Christmas Eve. But until that time, I hope you have a gracious day, and I look forward to talking to you tomorrow.